Theodore Hartley, the 8th Duke of Westmere, did not lift his eyes from the line of ink. The May light of the Grosvenor Square plane trees fell green across the page. The warm copper of the inkstand caught it, and a soft wind moved the curtain at her shoulder. Somewhere in the hall, a clock began to strike 11 and stopped at the 4th chime, as though it, too, were embarrassed by what had been asked of it. Honoria heard the dry, cleared throat of the butler at the door and did not turn. The wind moved against the tall window. The silk of her sleeve brushed the lacquered edge of the desk. 5 women were sitting in the long drawing room beyond. 5 candidates she had vetted herself, 2 of them heiresses, 1 of them his own cousin's choice. All 5 capable, all 5 willing, all 5 within the precise, narrow brief he had signed her to in February. The Duke read the page twice. "You have brought me 5, he said, as agreed. Mrs. Cleverley recommended you. I am aware." He turned the page in silence and set it down. The silver pen rested at his right hand, the iron grate cold behind him, the leather of the chair arm warm beneath his cuff. His coat was very black against the polished walnut, his shoulders filling the chair the way a saddle fills a wall in a tack room, easily, without forethought. There was a scar at the edge of his left wrist, where the cuff fell short of the hand. He had not, in 3 meetings, ever covered it. Honoria had catalogued it in February alongside his French, Parisian, accurate, slightly out of date, and his preference for tea without sugar. "You will send them away," he said. She heard the words distinctly and, for a heartbeat, did not believe them. "Your Grace?" "All 5. Your Grace, 3 of them have travelled from—" "I shall pay their journey." The line came out flat and unhurried, the way a magistrate might dismiss accosting in his own court, not unkindly, only with the certainty of a man who has reached the end of his patience without raising his voice. Honoria felt the certainty land somewhere under her sternum. He stood up. Honoria's training, hammered into her by Mrs. Cleverley across 6 years of mortifying drawing rooms, was that one did not stand when a duke stood. One waited. She waited. He went around the desk to the long sash window and put his hand flat on the glass. "Miss Ashcroft," he said, "I should like to engage you for a different commission. I do not take different commissions in the middle of an engaged one. You will take this one." "Will I?" He turned. The light caught his eyes, grey, not blue as she had written in her file, and tired in a way she had failed to record. Something inside her chest moved a 1/4 inch sideways and then resettled. "You will take it," he said, "because I am asking you to marry me." Outside, on the gravel of the parterre, a sparrow scolded a crow off the railing. Honoria put her hand on the edge of the desk to steady herself, and then, because she was Miss Ashcroft of Cleverley's and would not be told what her own face was doing, she let go of the desk. "That is not amusing, Your Grace." "I have never," he said, "in my life attempted to be amusing." The grey of his eyes had gone quite level. There was no theatre in him. He had said it once, and intended plainly never to say it again unless required. "You engaged me to find you a wife." "I engaged you to discover what I want." A small, dry smile. "You have done so." She turned and walked out of the room before she could disgrace either of them by laughing, by weeping, or by accepting. She had been 20 when her father, the Reverend Mr. Ashcroft of St. Mary Marbury, had been buried in the vicarage churchyard under a stone that read, "I have finished the work given me." There had been £411 of debt. There had been her mother's small jointure, which Honoria had refused to take. There had been Mrs. Cleverley, who had known her father at school and had said, with the brisk kindness of a woman who had once been a vicar's daughter herself, "You read people, child. I have watched you read people since you were 10. Come to me." 6 years now. Mrs. Cleverley's discreet little house in Half Moon Street received 11 kinds of ladies: widowed, ruined, jilted, monstrously wealthy, unfashionably plain, unfashionably brilliant, and 12 kinds of gentlemen, sorted by income and intent. Honoria was the firm's quiet engine. She did not flirt, she did not flatter. She read a man's letters in his presence and named, in 3 pleasant sentences, the kind of wife who would not unmake him. She had matched 7 couples in her last 12 months. 2 of them had written her at Christmas. She had never, by deliberate construction, considered herself part of the inventory. Her mother, Mrs. Ashcroft, who lived now with Honoria's married sister in Hertfordshire, had said in February, on the morning Honoria left for Grosvenor Square with the Duke's signed brief in her satchel, "You will pick him a good one, Hattie." And she had meant it the way mothers mean it, that her daughter would do her job, and come home to a small set of rooms above Mrs. Cleverley's, and be useful, and be safe, and would not ever be asked. Honoria had thought herself safe. Safety, she had decided at 21 in Mrs. Cleverley's back kitchen, was the cardinal middle-class virtue, the quiet, sustaining counterpart to a clergyman's faith and a tradesman's ledger. Safety did not require love. Safety required only an honest day's work, a respectable bed, 4 shillings a week put by for the future, and the steady cultivation of a temperament that could read a duke at his own desk without ever wanting anything from him beyond the fee. Safety, in short, was the small and unromantic kingdom in which a vicar's daughter could expect to rule herself to the end of her days without being interfered with by the impolite condescension of Providence. Providence, that morning at Grosvenor Square, had interfered. She walked from Grosvenor Square to Berkeley Street with a step so even that no one passing remarked on her face. The lilac was out along the railings of the squares. A child being walked by a nursery maid pointed at a milk cart horse and said, very clearly, "Mamma would say no." Honoria heard it because she was, that morning, hearing everything. She did not stop. She did not turn back. She crossed at the corner of Hill Street and went up the white stone steps of Mrs. Cleverley's house and gave her bonnet to the maid and went straight up to Mrs. Cleverley's morning room and said, before the door was quite closed, "He has asked me to marry him." Mrs. Cleverley, who at 61 had thought she was past being surprised, set down a teacup with a small, audible click. "Of the 5? None of the 5. You. Me." Mrs. Cleverley studied her for a long moment over the rim of her cup. She was a small, handsome, grey-haired woman in steel-coloured silk. Her drawing-room smelt always of beeswax, and the particular dry sweetness of letters that have been kept too long. She set the cup down. "And you walked out?" "I did. Without an answer. Without one I could give in his hearing without disgracing the firm or myself." Mrs. Cleverley did not laugh, which was, in her, the deepest possible kindness. She said only, "Sit, child. Drink the tea before it goes cold." And Honoria sat in the chair that did not get the morning sun, and drank the tea, and discovered that her hands were shaking only at the wrists, which was a great improvement on what she had felt on the stairs. "Tell me, then," said Mrs. Cleverley, "exactly what he said." The Duke of Westmere walked the length of his library 3 times after she had gone. Sleep had not gone well in March or April. The work was an easy thing to blame. Westmere was vast and badly run, and his late brother had let the home farm slip until tenants were paying in promises and his man of business in apologies. The season was another easy thing. He hated London. The cousins were a third easy thing, of whom there were too many, all of them waiting for him to do as 8th dukes did, which was die before producing a son, so that the dukedom would pass to the line that wanted it. Miss Ashcroft had not, at any point, been on the list of easy things he had blamed. The cold stone fireplace held 2 objects on its mantel, bright against the dark of the room. A small carved horse his nephew had given him when the boy was 4, and a folded letter from the regimental surgeon at Waterloo, dated 1815, that he had carried since he was a captain of dragoons. Theodore touched the horse with 2 fingers. The letter he left alone. 6 months ago, The captaincy had ended. One became, at 30, 28, he reminded himself. He was 28. The wrong age kept arriving. Some part of him had begun walking into rooms thinking he was older than he was, as though by the act of becoming his brother, he had also borrowed his brother's birthday. At the corner of the carpet, he stopped and pressed his thumb hard into the bone of his wrist, the way the surgeon had taught him to do when he wished to think clearly. He thought clearly, then, for the first time that week. The firm of Mrs. Cleverly had been engaged in February under 3 conditions: a wife with land of her own, an even temper, and an indifference to him personally that would survive the discovery he did not sleep through a night without waking. That he was, in plain English, a man whose nights woke him up with the colour of a particular morning at Waterloo he had failed, in 10 years, to put down. Miss Ashcroft, in February, had read the 3 conditions and written one word in the margin in pencil. No. He had said, "I beg your pardon." She had said, "I will write you 5 names by April. I will not write you a contract whose first clause is that your wife is to be indifferent to you. That is not a marriage. That is a tenancy." Walking home that day along Piccadilly, he had thought to himself, "I have hired the wrong woman." In the months since, he had hired no one else. The desk drew him back. He sat. The leather of the chair creaked. The brass of the inkstand was cold. The warm afternoon light touched his shoulder. The contract she had pushed across to him lay in her own dry, careful hand. Miss Charlotte Lambeth, of Lambeth Park, Northamptonshire. 11,000 a year, even-tempered, indifferent. Lady Frances Stamford, 8,000. Witty without cruelty, indifferent. Miss Maria Penwarden, 14,000. Accomplished, indifferent. The Honourable Mrs. Vyse, widow of Lord Vyse's cousin, 5,000. 4 healthy children, indifferent. His eye reached the 5th name and stopped. His own cousin Caroline. 6,000 a year of her own from her mother's people. Caroline, who had, at the dinner at Christmas, set her wineglass down a 1/4 inch and said, "I should be very happy to be useful to you, Theodore." And he had pretended not to hear it. Honoria had written next to Caroline's name, "She will not refuse you. Do not engage her. H.A." He sat for a long time looking at the 4 small words. Do not engage her. Then he stood and rang the bell. "Find Miss Ashcroft," he said to the butler. "Send to Half Moon Street. Tell her I shall call this afternoon." "To Half Moon Street, Your Grace." "To Mrs. Cleverly's. She will know where she is." She did not receive him in the morning room. Mrs. Cleverly, after 20 minutes of a conversation in which Honoria had not raised her voice once, and Mrs. Cleverly had raised hers exactly twice, had said, "Then we will see what he has come to say. Together." So Honoria stood at the window of Mrs. Cleverly's small green parlour, and Mrs. Cleverly sat in the high-backed chair beside the fire, and the Duke of Westmere was shown in at 2 o'clock, and bowed first to Mrs. Cleverly, and then, more slowly, to Honoria. "Mrs. Cleverly, Miss Ashcroft." "Your Grace?" The Duke looked at Mrs. Cleverly. "Madam, I have come to ask Miss Ashcroft to forgive me a discourtesy." Mrs. Cleverly inclined her head. "Speak it, sir." "I should not have spoken to her in my house, at my desk, without preparing her. It was a question I had no right to put under the cover of a commission she had completed. I beg her pardon." He turned to Honoria. "I beg yours." Honoria, who had been prepared for an entirely different conversation, found that she had nothing in her mouth to put forward. She inclined her head an inch. The Duke held her eye and did not press. "And the answer?" he said. "The question was unfair, Your Grace. I will not answer it under unfair conditions." "Name the conditions." "You will engage me," she said, "on the terms of our original commission. I will deliver you a wife of the names already on your desk, or one of the further three I have not yet shown you. You will marry that wife, or you will not. That is the work I undertook. I will undertake nothing else under this roof or yours." He bowed slightly. "And the question I asked this morning?" "You will not ask it again," she said, "until you can ask it without offering me the work in exchange." There was a silence in the room. The fire ticked. Mrs. Cleverly, who had managed 73 engagements over the course of her professional life and had heard variations of nearly every conversation possible between a man and a woman in a green parlour, looked from one to the other and discovered that she had not, in fact, heard quite this one before. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Cleverly. The Duke smiled. It was a very small, very private smile, and it was not for Mrs. Cleverly. "Miss Ashcroft," he said, "you have engaged me. I accept the terms." The first of the five was Miss Charlotte Lambeth. She came on the Tuesday at 3:00 with her aunt, Lady Sefton, who was a friend of the Dowager and a woman of considerable patience and limited curiosity. Miss Lambeth was 24, dark, even-featured, very still. She had a quiet, pleasant voice and a habit of laying her gloves precisely parallel on her lap. Honoria sat in a small gilt chair against the wall, between the Dowager and Lady Sefton, and watched the Duke speak to Miss Lambeth about the management of a marl pit on the Lambeth estate, which Miss Lambeth knew thoroughly and explained with a quiet authority that ought, in a well-ordered drawing-room, to have moved him to admiration. He listened with great courtesy. He asked one question about drainage. Miss Lambeth answered it. The Dowager, his mother, sat very upright across the room in dove-grey silk and nodded once, which was, in her, an entire ovation. After exactly 40 minutes, the Duke rose and bowed to Miss Lambeth and said, "Madam, you do credit to your father's name. I am much obliged for the visit." Miss Lambeth understood at once what had been said and was not said. The fire in the small grate crackled once. A touch of smoke crossed the warm air. She inclined her head, set her gloves on, and was handed out by Lady Sefton, with no flicker of disappointment that Honoria could read. Honoria, behind her chair, did read. The small tightening at the corner of Miss Lambeth's mouth as she passed the Duke at the door, the half-second pause before Lady Sefton's foot found the first stair, and was, against every professional instinct, relieved. She had liked Miss Lambeth. She had thought him a fool for not, at least, considering her. That evening, Mrs. Cleverly said over tea, "Well?" He spoke very civilly. "And?" "He did not—" Honoria stopped. She set the teacup down and picked it up again. "He did not look at her once with what I should call attention." "You watched him for 40 minutes. That is my work." "That is your work," said Mrs. Cleverly mildly, and let the matter drop. The second was Lady Frances Stamford on Thursday. Lady Frances was 31, witty, beautifully turned out in a peacock blue carriage dress that Honoria mentally added to the file under confident in her own taste. The silk of the gown was bright in the warm afternoon light, the soft kid of her glove cold at the cuff. She made the Duke laugh once, a brief, startled laugh, at a story about a bishop and a parrot. She asked him 3 excellent questions about his late brother's library. Westmere had been famously bookish, and answered his return question about her own collection with such precision that Honoria saw the Dowager nod. The Duke said at the end, "Lady Frances, you are everything they say you are, and a great deal beside." Which, in his particular grammar, was a refusal so courteous Lady Frances's smile did not even break. In the carriage afterwards, they were dining at Mrs. Cleverly's, Honoria let her professional face dissolve into something dry and almost angry. "He liked her." "He did," said Mrs. Cleverly. "And he will not marry her. He will not." He will not marry any of the 5. Mrs. Cleverly turned her face towards the carriage window and watched the lamps lighting along Park Lane. No, she said. He will not. Then why am I doing this? Mrs. Cleverly looked at her. It was the look she had given Honoria across the kitchen table 6 years before in the vicarage scullery, when Honoria had said, 20 years old and unable to weep, I have nowhere to go. It was the look that said, you know perfectly well why. Do not insult either of us by asking. Honoria looked at the carriage floor. Hattie, said Mrs. Cleverly very gently, you cannot match a man who is in love with you to a woman he has never seen. That is not in our line of work. It is not in any line of work. He is not in love with me. He has engaged us to introduce him to 5 women he has no intention of marrying. He has asked you to marry him in his library at 11 in the morning. He has apologized. He has accepted the terms by which you instructed him to ask. He has paid for a candidate from Northamptonshire to travel for 1 interview, and another from Bath, and another from Edinburgh, in order to spend 40 minutes each in your company at the back of his drawing room. If he is not in love with you, he is— She paused. Very fond of theatre, and he has no theatre in him at all. Honoria did not look up. I cannot, she said. You can. The question is whether you will. He will tire of me. In 9 summers? In 9 winters? He will not. He will tire of what I do. He has hired what you do. He has trusted what you do. He has put the firm's reputation in your hand, because what you do is the steadiest thing he has met since his brother was lost to him. Honoria, against her own will, smiled a 1/4 of an inch. You should not make a habit, ma'am, of telling young women the truth in carriages. I shall stop the moment they stop earning it. The 3rd was Miss Maria Penwarden, daughter of Lady Augusta Penwarden, and the meeting was, by precedent, the one Honoria had been arranging her file to delay. She had known Augusta Penwarden in another life. In another life, when the Reverend Ashcroft had still been alive, and Honoria had spent 2 warm summers in Bath with his curate's family, the cold stone of the Crescent bright in the morning sun. She and Augusta had been 16 and 15, very close, and the kind of close one could be only at that age, in that town, on that lawn, with the band playing in the pump room and the lights coming on at 6 o'clock along Milsom Street. Augusta had been an earl's daughter. Honoria had been a vicar's. The friendship had been impossible and beautiful, and had ended in a single afternoon, when Augusta, 2 days before Honoria's father was buried, had cut Honoria publicly in the gardens for the sake of an introduction to Mr. Penwarden, who had 9,000 a year and a horror of clergymen. Augusta had not written. Augusta had not, in 11 years, written. Honoria had written, once, in her first year at Mrs. Cleverly's, with a sharp quill on the dry cream paper the firm kept for first approaches, a brisk, professional note. My dear Lady Penwarden, the firm of Mrs. Cleverly at Half Moon Street is now in my charge to a considerable extent, and we have begun to take introductions from your circle. Should it ever serve you to refer a young person, I am at your disposal. H. Ashcroft. There had been no reply. Lady Augusta Penwarden, now 32, had, Honoria had checked, referred 11 daughters of friends to Mrs. Cleverly's rivals. When Mrs. Cleverly had said, in March, Lady Augusta wishes her own girl introduced to Westmere, Honoria had said, before she could stop herself, Why us? Because, my dear, Westmere will not see anyone she has referred to Bidwell or Sangster. The Dowager has told her so. She has come to us by necessity, not preference. She has come, very specifically, to your hand. Honoria had nodded slowly. I shall handle the introduction in the firm's interest. You shall, said Mrs. Cleverly. Handle it in your own. Augusta had come yesterday with Miss Maria, £14,000, 22, golden, accomplished at the harp and the watercolour, with a small, breathy laugh that on better evidence Honoria might have found charming, and on this evidence found rehearsed. Augusta had not embraced Honoria. Augusta had said, "Miss Ashcroft," with the precise, cool register one uses for a milliner who has overcharged. Honoria had said, "Lady Augusta," and the Duke had been entirely civil to Miss Maria and entirely indifferent. He had asked her one question about her father's stables, and she had answered well. He had bowed. He had not invited her to remove her gloves. In the carriage going back to Half Moon Street, Mrs. Cleverly had said, "Your face was a wall, Hattie. I did not raise my voice. You did not raise your eyebrow either. She came to do me an injury. She came to marry her daughter to a duke who has no intention of marrying her daughter. The injury is incidental." "The injury is not incidental." Mrs. Cleverly studied her. "Then we will address it." Augusta came back the following afternoon, alone. She was shown into the green parlour. Mrs. Cleverly, with that particular instinct of hers, had a great deal of correspondence in the morning room that needed attending to. Honoria received her standing. "Miss Ashcroft." "Lady Augusta." There was a long pause. Augusta sat without being invited, her cold hand bright with rings on the warm walnut of the chair arm. She was very beautifully dressed in primrose silk. She had been a brilliant girl on the lawn at Bath, and was a more brilliant woman now, with the same surprised laugh and the same precise mouth. Honoria, who had thought herself entirely past being moved by Augusta Penwarden, discovered that she was, in a small way, still 16 in some particular pocket of her ribs. "You will give my Maria to him." "I cannot give him anyone. I can only introduce." "You have already introduced 4 girls, and he has met them all in cold formality. You will introduce Maria again, properly, at his own dinner table, where she may speak and be heard, or you will not see another commission from any house in my circle for the rest of your career." Honoria sat down then, because it cost her too much to keep standing for what was coming. "Lady Augusta," she said, "Miss Maria is a lovely girl. The Duke is not for her. He is not for Miss Lambeth, or Lady Frances either. He is not, in fact, in the market for any wife from the 5 names he had me find him. I did not know this in February. I know it now." Augusta's mouth went still. "Then you will resign the commission." "I will not." "He has bought you." "He has engaged me." "He has," said Augusta very softly, "bought you, Honoria. He has done what your father always failed to do, and he has paid you to do it. Do not pretend with me. I have known you since you were 15. Honoria felt the words at the base of her throat, where, 11 years ago, her cut on the gravel walk had landed. She did not look away. She did not raise her voice. "You have not known me since I was 15, Lady Augusta. You have not, in 11 years, known me at all. You have known the shape of an absence, and that is a quite different acquaintance." Augusta sat very still. "I shall make the Duke understand," she said at last, in a flatter voice, "that Mrs. Cleverly's firm is run by an ambitious vicar's daughter who has used his engagement to make herself a bride. Whatever he believes of you on Tuesday, by Sunday he will not." She rose. She drew on her gloves. At the door she paused. "Maria did nothing to you. Remember that." The door closed. Honoria sat for a long time afterwards on the small chair by the fire. The clock on the mantel struck 4. A coal cracked in the grate and rolled forward against the fender. She got up, took the tongs, set the coal back. She rang the bell. "Tea, please, Bessie. Strong." She wrote that evening, by the soft light of 2 candles, with the iron snuffer cold at her hand, 3 brief notes, one to Miss Lambeth, one to Lady Frances, one to the Honourable Mrs. Vyse, thanking each for her time, expressing the firm's regrets, returning the second-tier inquiries. There was no note to Caroline Hartley. The Duke had spared his cousin the indignity of an interview. There was, too, no note to Miss Maria Penwarden. Maria, Honoria thought, had been written quite enough already by her mother. She sealed the 3 notes with a soft red wax that smelled faintly of pine. The brass seal was warm at her hand. She put on her bonnet, the soft ribbon cold against the warm skin at her throat. She walked them herself, in the dusk, to the 3 doors. It was the only thing she could do that her training permitted. She did the rest in her own room, with the candle out. The Duke came on Saturday morning to Half Moon Street and said to Mrs. Cleverley, "Madam, I require Miss Ashcroft's professional opinion on a matter of estate management. I do not require a third party. I shall keep the door open." Mrs. Cleverley, who liked him, said, "Then the door shall stay open, Your Grace, and I shall sit in the morning room over my accounts and listen for exactly the volume of voice I judge to be improper, and intervene at it." The Duke bowed. He and Honoria sat in the green parlour with the door propped wide. He had brought a folded paper. "This is the home farm account at Westmere for the past 12 months. My steward, who is not a thief, only an optimist, has been carrying 3 tenants on the books at rents I cannot recover. The rents are too high. The cottages will not bear them. The tenants are good men. I shall lose them by Michaelmas if I do nothing. I should like your view." She unfolded the paper. She read it slowly. She had been reading household ledgers since she was 12, when her father had given her, instead of an embroidery hoop, the parish accounts to keep. "Why are you bringing me this?" "Because you read books of accounts faster than any man I know, and you do not, in reading them, lose sight of who the names are." "Why not your man of business?" "Because my man of business will tell me what is recoverable. I should like to be told what is right." She looked up. "You should reduce the rents at once on the 3 cottages. You should call it a remission until Michaelmas, on the explicit grounds of the wet autumn. You should let the steward make the announcement, not you. You should send the tenants flour from the home farm at cost in the meantime. You should, after Michaelmas, set the new rents at the level the cottages will bear, and you should write off the 3 years of arrears on the same instrument as the new lease. The men will see it as a kindness. They will not see it as charity, which they will refuse." He was looking at her with that particular still look, the one she had begun, against herself, to anticipate. "How long," he said, "have you been doing this?" "What?" "This, reading other people's lives faster than they read them themselves." "Since I was 11, she said, before she could stop herself. 11. "My father gave me the parish accounts." He nodded slowly. He folded the paper. He did not put it back in his pocket. He set it on the table between them. "Will you ride with me tomorrow?" he said. "On what professional footing?" "On none whatever. I should like to be in a horse's company, and yours." The pulse at her wrist did something disgraceful. She held her hands very steady in her lap. "Mrs. Cleverley," she said, "will say it is improper." Mrs. Cleverley has been listening to every word of this conversation through an open door. If she meant to forbid it, she would already have. In the morning room, they heard a small, distinct cough. Honoria almost smiled. 2 o'clock, she said. "Hyde Park, with a groom." "With a groom," he said, and rose, and bowed, and went. The ride was the gravest mistake of her professional career. It was a mistake she could trace, afterwards, with the bookkeeping precision of a woman who had been writing brief lines in a margin since she was 11. She had agreed to it under the false security of an open door at Mrs. Cleverley's, and the unfalse honesty of a man asking for nothing he could not, in good faith, have asked of any client. She had agreed to it knowing perfectly well that 2 o'clock in Hyde Park in late May was the empty hour. The bright, warm afternoon soft on the rough sand of the Row, the slack tide of the social day, and that an open hour with this man was the precise condition under which the small, unguarded sentences she had been catching in her file since February might begin to gather. She had agreed to it, in short, because she had wanted to. And in 6 years at Mrs. Cleverley's, she had not once, before this morning, made a professional decision on the basis of what she had wanted. They went up the Row at the empty hour after the riding parties of the morning had dispersed and before the carriages of the afternoon had filled. The dust of the sandy track was dry under the hooves. A cold spring wind moved at her ear and at his shoulder. The Duke rode a tall black horse with a habit of side-glancing at things. Honoria rode the chestnut mare Mrs. Cleverley kept for her ladies, which had a fixed conviction that all bridle paths were too long. The groom rode 3 lengths behind, with the discretion of a man who has been 3 lengths behind for 20 years. The Duke did not talk for the first quarter of a mile. Honoria, who had ridden with 7 previous clients on professional terms, and had managed in each instance to keep the conversation within the 4 walls of an itemized brief, discovered that there was no brief between them today, and that this freedom was, in fact, the most precarious thing she had ever sat with. She looked at his hands on the reins. Light, level, low. He had begun to roll his left sleeve down a little against the morning chill, and the scar at his wrist had vanished beneath the cuff. "You said," she observed, "that you should like to be in a horse's company, and mine." "I did." "I notice the horse is doing most of the talking." He laughed. It was again the brief, startled laugh of a man who had not expected to. The black horse pricked its ears at it. "Forgive me," he said. "I have been thinking how to speak to you without making it a question." "Of marriage?" "Of marriage." "You agreed not to?" "I agreed not to ask it under the cover of a commission. I am not, at present, asking it. I am thinking how I should ever, having agreed not to, manage to ask it at all." "Then ride and do not think." "That is an old dragoon's prescription, Miss Ashcroft." "My father used to give it to me when I was angry at fractions." They came to the long stretch where the trees of Kensington Gardens close in on one side, and the rail fence drops away on the other. He drew his horse in a little. "Tell me," he said, "about your father." It was the question she had been dodging in 2 interviews and a green parlour and a library. She rode 3 lengths before she answered. "He was a vicar of the old school, stubborn, quiet. He preached without notes and married without notes, and buried his wife when I was 12 without breaking his voice once. He owed £411 when he was gone. He had given the 400 to people who needed it more than he did. The 11 was the printer's bill for parish notices." "You did not pay it?" "My mother paid it, from a sum she had not told him she had set aside. We went to my aunt. My sister married. I went to Mrs. Cleverley's." "Without dowry?" "Without dowry." "And without inclination," he said, "to be regarded as one of your candidates." "Without inclination," she said, "to be regarded as anyone's candidate." "By your father?" She paused. The mare shook her head. A leaf came down off a plane tree and stuck briefly to the chestnut's ear. "My father," she said, "told me twice. Once when I was 14, once when I was 19. He said a clergyman's daughter must not, on any account, marry above her station. He said it would end in her being looked at by the man's relations as though she had picked his pocket. He said I was not, in any case, the sort of girl whom men of fortune notice. He meant it kindly. He thought he was protecting me." "From what?" "From, I believe, my own pride. He was wrong about most things, and right about pride." The Duke rode in silence for a long moment. "I am not, Miss Ashcroft, his relations." "You are a duke, Your Grace." "I am also a man whose mother liked your father's sermons. She told me on Wednesday. She had heard him preach at the wedding of a school friend of hers in Marbury in 1812. She remembered the text. Honoria turned her face. What text? Bear ye one another's burdens. The mayor shook her head again. That is not a fair argument, Your Grace. I am not, today, attempting fairness. They reached the turn at the end of the row. The groom kept his discreet 3 lengths. The Duke drew his horse in alongside hers and put out his gloved hand, palm up, an inch above her left rein, not touching, not asking. Honoria, he said, and it was the first time she had heard her own name in his voice, and it landed in a particular pocket of her ribs that had not, before today, existed. Tell me, only for myself, what you want. She looked at his hand. She did not put hers on his. She said very low, I want, Your Grace, not to make a fool of either of us. He drew his warm hand back from the cold leather of the rein. The mare shook her warm chestnut head a third time, the leather of the rein creaking once at his hand, and the moment, mercifully, broke on the rein. That is not what I asked, he said gently, but I shall accept it as the answer for today. Augusta did the thing she had said she would do. She did it, Honoria realized afterwards, with a craftsmanship that had taken her 11 years of social practice to perfect. The kind of careful malice that does not survive a direct contradiction in a parlor, but survives a printed sheet very well indeed. The mechanism was not original to her. Every season produced 1 or 2 paragraphs of its kind, usually anonymous, usually issued in revenge for a slight that the issuer would not, under oath in a magistrate's court, have been able to name. What was original to Augusta was the choice of weapon. She had not gone for a story. She had gone for a tone. The tone was that of an experienced clubman, drawling out a confidence to a younger man over the brandy. It was the tone that travelled. It was the tone that would, by Sunday morning, have repeated itself in 80 dressing rooms across Mayfair, without a single woman in any of them quite remembering where she had first heard it. By Tuesday at 5 o'clock, there was a paragraph in a printed sheet that circulated between the dressing rooms of Mayfair and the writing tables of St. James's. The paragraph said, A certain Duke of W has shown a remarkable preference this season for the lady of business who was engaged to find him a wife. The lady, who is the relict of an obscure country incumbency, has so far refused the 4 respectable candidates her own agency provided, on grounds her client cannot help but find flattering. By Wednesday at noon, 2 of the great hostesses had withdrawn invitations to the Dowager. By Wednesday at 3 o'clock, the Dowager, who was a small, upright, dove-grey woman who had ruled Westmere with a kind ruthlessness for 31 years, was sitting in Mrs. Cleverley's morning room, with 2 spots of colour high on her cheekbones, and her gloves still on. Mrs. Cleverley, Miss Ashcroft. Your Grace, I shall be playing. My son will not be moved on this. I have spent 40 minutes this morning attempting to move him. He will marry no one but Miss Ashcroft. He has said so to me. He has said so to his cousin. He will say so, I am informed, to the Archbishop if pressed. The question before us is therefore not whether the marriage shall take place. It is whether it shall take place in a London that has been told he has been bought, or in a London that has been told he has chosen. Honoria's hands closed in her lap. Madam, she said, I have not yet accepted his addresses. You will accept them, Miss Ashcroft, or you will not. That is your business. But you will not, I trust, accept them in a manner that ruins my son's name in his own county. He has a tenantry of 800 souls. He has a parish that depends on the appearance of dignity in its lord. He has a sister-in-law on the verge of a confinement who needs the season's gossip to break against any subject other than her brother-in-law's choice of wife. The choice of wife I can support. The shape of the rumour I cannot. Your Grace, said Mrs. Cleverley, may I ask who has authored the paragraph? The Dowager looked at her steadily. You may ask, I will tell you. Augusta Penwarden, an hour after my son refused her daughter on Friday. I have known Augusta Penwarden since she was 3. She was a vain little girl, and she is a vain woman, and I have written her this morning that she is no longer at home in my house. She will not retract the paragraph. I do not ask her to. I ask you, Miss Ashcroft, to make my son's case in such a manner that the retraction is not required." "How?" The dowager's mouth softened a little, a 1/4 inch only. "By marrying him properly. By marrying him with a settlement that ties no part of Westmere to your name, save the jointure I shall draw for you myself, in your own handwriting, if you prefer. By marrying him at St. George's, with my own people sitting on his side and yours sitting on yours, and the parish bells rung. By being, at your wedding breakfast, exactly the woman you have been in his library and at his table. A woman of mind, who reads accounts faster than his steward. The town will accept what it cannot deny. Augusta's paragraph will, by Whitsun, be the joke at her own table." Honoria looked at the floor, then at the dowager. "Madam, I have not yet said yes to your son." "I am aware. I am asking what you require to say it." "I require him to ask me without his mother in the room." "He has tried. You walked out." "He shall try again. Without—" a small breath. "This paragraph in his hand. Without the print of London on his back. Without the Dowager Duchess of Westmere having been forced to call on a matchmaker in Half Moon Street." The dowager almost smiled. "You wish, Miss Ashcroft, to be asked, not rescued." "Madam, yes." "Then I shall withdraw and let him try again." She rose. At the door she paused. "If it serves you to know it, I am not, on the whole, sorry it is you. He has been a hard man to live with since Waterloo, and you have been, by his account, the only person whose company has, this spring, not been part of his work. That is rare in a duke. It is rare in any man. I will not say it twice. I have said it now." She went. Mrs. Cleverley poured a second cup of tea. Her hand was very steady. Her face was not. "Hattie." "Ma'am." "I do not advise you in this. I have stopped advising you. I had better tell you so, lest you feel I have." "Yes, ma'am." "I will only," said Mrs. Cleverley, "ask one question." "Ask it." "Will you be sorry, when you are 61 and have managed 73 engagements, if you have not, in the end, managed your own?" Honoria looked at her hands. "Yes," she said. She did not sleep on Wednesday night. She lay on her back on the rough sheet in the small, cold room above Mrs. Cleverley's, with the bright moonlight coming in at the dormer at an angle that struck the warm brass corner of the washing jug on the stand, and she went through, in the level, dispassionate voice she used for vetting candidates, what the dowager had actually said. The dowager had not said, "Your son loves her." The dowager had said, "My son will not be moved." The dowager had not said, "He has chosen you for who you are." The dowager had said, "The question before us is whether the marriage shall take place in a London that has been told he has been bought, or in a London that has been told he has chosen." The choice on offer, in other words, was a shape. It was not a content. She turned her face on the pillow. The choice was a shape. Theodore had bought a shape. The shape of a refusal at his own desk in the library. The shape of a vicar's daughter who could write "no" in the margin of a contract. And the dowager had come to the firm to ratify the shape. Augusta's paragraph in the printed sheet had given the shape its proper public outline. Theodore would marry Honoria because he had publicly refused 4 other women and could not, in good standing, now marry any of them. The dowager would shore up the social damage. Honoria, with her professional steadiness and her useful firm and her parish school competence at ledgers, would be installed at Westmere as a kind of permanent, excellent housekeeper, of whom the tenantry would say after a season or 2, "She has settled him." The dowager had said as much. A wife with mind, who reads accounts faster than his steward. A description of a serviceable woman, not the description of a woman a duke had, in any private sense, asked for. He had courted her for the shape. He had courted her because the shape of her refusal had given him a way out of marrying any of the 5 women he had paid her to find him. The morning at his desk, "I am asking you to marry me," had not been a declaration. It had been a relinquishment. The 8th Duke setting down a duty he had grown tired of carrying, in finding her standing nearest. The ride in the Row had been the relinquishment, dressed up in a leaf and a thrush. The folded sheet she had not yet seen, the dry paper cold somewhere in another room, but the Dowager had been very specific about its absence on Tuesday afternoon, and she was a woman who knew, in advance, what her son would put on a page. Would be a settlement, gracious and dispossessing, in which he made over to Miss Ashcroft of Marbury exactly the dignity Westmere required she retain, so that Westmere's name remained, in the world's mouth, intact. She lay with her hands open at her sides on the counterpane, and let that reading run its full length. It ran well. It accounted for everything. It accounted for the Duke who had not, in 3 meetings, ever covered his Waterloo scar. It accounted for the small smile in the library. It accounted for the Dowager's brisk, dove-grey arrival in Mrs. Cleverley's morning room. It accounted, most cruelly, for the moment at the turn of the Row, when he had drawn his gloved hand back from above her rein without ever quite touching her. The gesture, she now told herself, of a man being careful with a piece of furniture that the household has had to replace. She had been 13 once, when her mother had taken her to a London bazaar, and a stallholder had asked her, very gently, to set down the small bright painted china jug she had been touching, cold beneath her warm hand she had picked up without permission. And she had set it down and walked away, and the stallholder had thanked her for the carefulness, not for the looking. She had remembered the stallholder's voice for years afterwards. Theodore's voice in the library. "Honoria, only for myself. What do you want?" was the stallholder's voice. The same careful register. He had never seen her, she thought. He had only seen the leaf. She turned again on the pillow and discovered that her face was wet. She put the heel of her hand against her eye and pressed the wetness into the cotton, and lay quite still. The clock at St. George's struck 3. She got out of bed at 4. She lit her candle. She sat at the small writing table by the dormer in her shift and her old woolen wrap, and took up the pen and wrote, in the slope Augusta had taught her in 1815, 3 lines. "Your Grace," she had written on cold cream paper in the small, dry hours of the morning. "On reflection, I find I am not the woman for the office to which you have done me the honour of inviting me. I beg you will allow me to withdraw my acceptance of Friday morning, with all proper thanks and no claim of any kind upon you or your family. I shall be at Marbury by Saturday evening. H. Ashcroft." She folded it. She sealed it. She wrote on the cover, "The Duke of Westmere, Westmere House, Grosvenor Square," by hand. She set the letter at the corner of the writing table and went and stood at the dormer. The lilac on Half Moon Street was a black mass below. One of the lamps was guttering at the corner of Hill Street. She watched the lamp gutter and steady, and thought, with a calm she would later be ashamed of, "He will write me back a kind letter. He will not, I think, come round to the door. The Dowager will be relieved. Augusta will be triumphant in a small way, and quiet about it because she has, this once, the dignity to be quiet. Mrs. Cleverley will know inside 3 sentences not to ask. Marbury in the autumn is not the worst place. The vicarage cottage has been let to a clerk's family these 3 years, but they are decent people, and will receive me for a week. My mother will not say I told you so. My mother will not, in any case, say very much." She went back to bed. She blew the candle out. The dark closed over her like a held breath, and the small hours dragged her sleepless to dawn. At 7, Mrs. Cleverley's maid, Bessie, brought up hot water. At 8, Honoria came down dressed in grey, with the letter in her right hand, and gave it to the footman who stood, at that hour, in the front hall. "By hand," she said. "Grosvenor Square. Wait for no reply." The footman bowed. The door closed behind him. Mrs. Cleverly, who had been on the stairs and had heard the words "by hand" and "Grosvenor Square," came down into the hall and looked at Honoria, and looked at the front door, and looked at Honoria again. "Hattie." "Ma'am." "What have you sent?" "My withdrawal." Mrs. Cleverly stood very still. Then she said, in a voice Honoria had not heard from her in 6 years, "Come into the morning room." They went in. Mrs. Cleverly shut the door. "Sit down, child." "I had rather stand." "Sit down." Honoria sat. "Tell me," said Mrs. Cleverly, "exactly what you have told yourself between yesterday afternoon and this morning." Honoria told her. She told her in the level, dispassionate voice in which one read a contract: the dowager's choice of shape, the social arithmetic, the indigo silk of Westmere's reputation, the stall-holder at the London Bazaar, the carefulness of Theodore's glove against her cheek. She told it without pause. She did not weep. Mrs. Cleverly listened without interrupting once. When Honoria was finished, Mrs. Cleverly was silent for nearly a minute. Then Mrs. Cleverly said, "Hattie, you are wrong." "Ma'am?" "You are wrong on the dowager. You are wrong on the duke. You are wrong on the leaf." She paused, drew breath, and went on more steadily. "You are wrong on the stall-holder, who was, I will tell you, a perfectly ordinary man asking a child to set down something fragile. And that is not the gesture of a man being careful with furniture. That is the gesture of a man being careful with something he believes to be precious. You are wrong, in short, on every part of it." Honoria opened her mouth. Mrs. Cleverly held up one hand and stopped it there. "I will not, Honoria, prove you wrong. The Duke shall prove it himself, or he shall not. I will only tell you that the letter you have sent at 8 o'clock this morning will be at Grosvenor Square by past. He will be at this door by 10. You will receive him in this parlour. You will tell him what you have told me. He will, if he is the man I believe him to be, answer you. If he is not the man I believe him to be, you will go to Marbury on Saturday, and I will pay the clerk's family at the vicarage cottage out of the firm's account to receive you. And we shall not, you and I, speak of this again. Sit there. Bessie will bring fresh tea." Her voice cracked then, for the only time in 6 years, at the edge. "On no account leave this house before 10. Honoria sat. Bessie brought fresh tea. Honoria did not drink it. At 10 exactly the bell rang. At 3 minutes past 10, the Duke was shown in. He came in without his hat. He had been walking. His coat was a little dewed at the shoulders, and he had her letter in his right hand, folded once, the seal broken, his thumb pressed flat across her own handwriting on the cover. He did not bow. He had stopped bowing to her, by some private arrangement of his own, after the ride. "Honoria." "Your Grace." "You sent this." "I did." "At 8. "At 8. Will you tell me, in your own voice, what you sent it for?" She looked at the cold tile of the floor. The rough wood of the chair was warm beneath her hand. She had thought, between 8 and 10, that this was the part she would deliver well, that she had rehearsed it in the morning room with Mrs. Cleverly, and had it level in her chest, and would deliver it level. She looked at the floor for 10 seconds, and discovered that she could not, in his presence, deliver any of it level. She looked up. "Theodore?" "Yes." "In the library on Tuesday, you—" She stopped. She started again. "You came to find me," she said, "in February, with 3 conditions for a wife. The 3rd condition was indifference. You hired me because I wrote 'no' in the margin of that condition. You have spent 3 months not, in fact, looking for a wife. You have spent 3 months looking for a way not to marry any of the 5 women a wife by your 3 conditions would have been. I am the way. I am. Theodore, I see it. You cannot ask me not to see it. I am the shape of the refusal. Your mother said it on Wednesday afternoon. She said it kindly. She did not mean to say it. She said it. She said, the choice on offer is a shape, not a content. She is right. I cannot be a shape for you. I would rather be at Marbury in a let cottage than be a shape at Westmere with my name on the church bells. He stood very still. Finish, he said. I have not finished. Finish. I think, she said, you have been honourable about it. I think you have been kind. Her hands tightened in her lap. The fire ticked once. I think your settlement, the one in your hand which I have not seen, and which I shall not this morning ask to see, has been worded with the most careful regard for the dignity of a woman you do not, in fact, in any private sense want, only to whom you owe, by some private accounting of yours, the courtesy of pretending that you do. A coal cracked in the grate. Neither of them turned. I think you have asked Mrs. Cleverley's firm to do for you the one thing it cannot do, which is to find a way for an 8th Duke to marry a vicar's daughter without losing his reputation, and that the way you found is me, and that the way you found does me too much honour. She looked at her hands. The skin at her knuckles was white from the holding. I think you should marry no one this season. I think you should go to Westmere in October and ride alone for 6 months, and come back with a different list of 3 conditions, in which the 3rd is not indifference. She looked up at him then. I think, Theodore, I have thought this all night, that you have done a remarkable thing for me in the privacy of your own mind, and that the moment it leaves the privacy of your own mind, it will become a different thing, and that we shall both be sorry for it for the rest of our lives. Silence in the parlour. The fire ticked. Beyond the door, in the morning room, Mrs. Cleverley turned no page. She was, for the first time in 6 years, absolutely still at her own correspondence. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. He put her letter down on the small table between them. He took, from inside his coat, a second folded sheet. Heavier paper, his own seal broken. He set it on top of her letter. Read that one, he said. Before the second one I have not yet given you. She read it. It was the settlement she had described, the soft cream paper warm in her cold hand, the wax of the seal bright red, the one she had imagined, the one she had told herself in the 4 o'clock dawn at the dormer was the precise instrument of his courtesy and her erasure. Save that it was not. The page was 3 lines longer than she had imagined. The 3 extra lines, in his own small, careful slope, said, I declare further that this settlement is offered in the precise contemplation of a marriage of affection, not of social repair. I declare that I have, in the event of Miss Ashcroft's refusal at any time before the wedding, no claim of any kind upon her. I declare that no answer she gives, yes, no, or silence, is to be regarded by me, by my mother, or by any party as social damage to be made good. The damage, in such case, will be wholly mine, and properly so. T.J. Hartley. She lowered the page. He was watching her. He had not moved. That is not what you have told yourself this morning, he said. It is not. You have told yourself that I am marrying you to repair my refusal of the 4 ladies. I have. You have told yourself that I have engaged your firm in order not to engage with any of the candidates it would honestly produce. I have. You have told yourself that my hand offered above your rein in the Row and drawn back when you would not take it was the hand of a man being careful with a piece of furniture. Yes. He went down on one knee then, in Mrs. Cleverley's green parlour on Thursday morning. He did it as badly as he would do it the following day, when she would tell him to get up. He kept his eyes on hers. Honoria, the first 3 conditions were a coward's contract. He paused, and the pause held weight, the way a man's first honest sentence in months tends to. The condition I should have written, in February, in place of indifference, was, a woman who will not let me be a coward. I did not know the right name for that condition until I had been refused by a vicar's daughter in pencil in the margin of the first one. Every meeting since has been my attempt to discover whether I was right. I have been right. I have been right since February. He drew a breath. His left hand, the scarred one, lay open on his knee. I have been making myself a fool for 4 months in your presence, because I did not know how to ask without offering you, in the same sentence, an exchange that would insult you. The Dowager came to you on Wednesday afternoon to defend my name to a London that has noticed what I have noticed. She should not have done it. I shall make her apology myself by sundown. The fire ticked. A clock in the next room struck the quarter. The settlement you have just read is the kind of settlement my father drew for my mother in 1798. It is not the settlement of social repair. It is the settlement of a marriage of affection in a family that has had 4 of them in 3 generations. Honoria, look at me. She looked at him. Do not, he said, go to Marbury on Saturday. Or if you must, let me come with you. Let me ride down with the Dowager in the carriage, and your mother shall see for herself, in 2 minutes of speech with me, whether my mother and I have, between us, been honest with you. Take the morning. Take the afternoon. Take Friday morning, which is the time at which I should have, in any case, come to ask. But do not, Honoria, do not send a letter at 8 o'clock in the morning to a man who has loved you since February, without giving him the chance to tell you, in the parlour, that you are mistaken. She put both hands over her face. The fire ticked. Mrs. Cleverly, in the morning room beyond, did not move. After a long time, Honoria lowered her hands. Get up off your knee. He got up. I have, she said, no professional precedent for this conversation. There is none. There has not been one in the firm's books since the firm was founded. You will go now. I shall. You will come on Friday at 10, as you had planned. I shall. You will not, between now and Friday at 10, send to me, write to me, or send anyone with a message. I shall need the day. You shall have it. And the Dowager. I shall tell her at noon. She will not come round. Mrs. Cleverly will, between now and Friday, instruct me on no subject. Mrs. Cleverly, said the Duke, is presently sitting in the morning room across the hall, not turning a page of her correspondence because she is listening to every word of this conversation. She will, I suspect, instruct herself. A small, dry sound came from beyond the door. A page turning, 2 minutes too late. Theodore almost smiled. Honoria. Yes. Friday at 10. Friday at 10. He went. She sat for a long time in the green parlour, with the settlement open on her knee, and her own letter beside it. Mrs. Cleverly came in at noon, with a fresh pot of tea, and, for the first time in 6 years, sat in the chair next to Honoria's without speaking. They sat there for half an hour, the 2 of them, while the fire burned down and the clock struck the quarter. And at 12:30, Mrs. Cleverly said only, Friday at 10, then. Friday at 10. You will, I trust, accept him. I shall, ma'am. See what he says. He has said it. He has said it. I shall see what he is at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning, when he has not slept on it for a night, and decide accordingly. Mrs. Cleverly poured the tea. Her hand was steady. Her face, for the second time in 3 days, was not. He came to her in the green parlour at 10 on Friday morning. He brought no contract. He brought no flowers. He brought only himself, and a single folded sheet, and his hat in his hand. The chair Mrs. Cleverley had set out for him stood between them untaken. He kept to his feet, his cold hand on the rough back of the chair, his shoulder against the warm wood of the doorframe. "Honoria." "Your Grace?" "My name is Theodore." "I know. You have refused to use it." "I have been employed by you." "You are no longer employed by me. I dismissed the firm yesterday afternoon in writing. Mrs. Cleverley has the letter." She blinked. "You dismissed?" "With thanks. With a quarter's fee paid. Without," he glanced down, "any further claim of mine on the firm's offices in any matter whatsoever. The 4 ladies who came to my house are owed an apology, and shall have it from me by Saturday. Mrs. Cleverley shall have a recommendation from me to every house in Berkshire that wishes a good match. You are dismissed, Honoria, from all professional dealing with me, and you stand in this room this morning as exactly what you are. A vicar's daughter from Marbury, who has been kept too long, by no fault of hers, from being asked a question by a man who loves her." She set both hands on the arms of her chair. "Theodore?" "Yes?" "That is— wait." He came one step closer. He held the folded sheet. "I should like you to read this before I ask anything." He put it into her hand. She unfolded it. It was a single page in his own hand, small, careful, with the slight forward slope that she had read across 3 sets of estate accounts and 1 March contract. It said, "I, Theodore James Hartley, 8th Duke of Westmere, do declare, in my own hand and before witnesses to be named at the time of marriage, I declare that no part of the estate of Westmere, no part of the London house in Grosvenor Square, no part of any property entailed or unentailed pertaining to me, shall be settled in any clause upon Miss Honoria Ashcroft. The sole exception is the jointure customary to a Duchess of Westmere, which is set out in the entail, and which I cannot, lawfully, vary. I declare further," the words written in his own dry hand on cold cream paper, "that no claim shall ever be made by me or by my heirs upon any income, property, or interest, currently or hereafter, belonging to Miss Ashcroft, including her interest in the firm of Mrs. Cleverley of Half Moon Street, which shall remain in her sole disposition and at her sole discretion. I declare, finally, that I undertake this marriage in the full understanding that Miss Ashcroft has been earning her bread by her own work since she was 20 years of age, and that nothing in the marriage I propose is to be construed by her, or by any other person, as the giving up of that work, or of any portion of the dignity that work has earned her. T.J. Hartley. She read it twice. She put the page on the small table between them. Her hands were shaking quite openly now. "You wrote this." "I wrote it." You are giving up the right to your own wife's." "I'm not giving anything up. I'm refusing to take what is not mine. There is a difference. You have taught it to me. Sit down, Honoria." She sat, not because he had told her to, because her knees had decided. He went down on one knee. He did it badly, the way a man of his height and his sort of dignity always will do it badly, with a slight rueful adjustment of his coat. He put his hand on the arm of her chair, not on hers. "Honoria Ashcroft," he said, "I love you. I have loved you since the morning in February when you wrote no in the margin of my contract. I have not, until this week, known what to do with it, and I have made a mess of 3 months trying to find out. I do not ask you to give up Mrs. Cleverley's. I do not ask you to give up your name. I ask you to take a husband who will be very glad to be of use to you, and who will not, on any account, mistake your work for mine. Will you marry me?" She looked at him for a long time. The fire ticked in the grate. The clock on the mantel struck the quarter. Somewhere in the morning room beyond the wall, Mrs. Cleverley turned a page over with a small, dry sound. For a long moment, she could not, for the loudness of her own pulse at her wrists, hear the fire ticking. The clock on the mantel had stopped at the half. Somewhere on the gravel path beyond the morning-room window, a sparrow worried at the same single crumb it had been worrying at since breakfast. A right hand, of its own accord, smoothed a fold of her grey gown across her knee, then let the fold go. "Theodore?" "Yes." "Get up off your knee." He got up. The motion was unhurried. He kept his eyes on hers as he did it. "Sit down." He sat. "Now ask me again, without the page." He smiled, slowly, helplessly, the way she had not in 3 months seen him smile. "Honoria, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said. "I will." They walked out together along the gravel path of Mrs. Cleverley's small back garden, where the lilac was just beginning to brown at the edges, and a thrush was singing in the elder by the wall. Mrs. Cleverley had given them 10 minutes. Mrs. Cleverley had said, "10 minutes, no more. I shall come out with a tea tray at the 11th. He walked with his hands behind his back. She walked with her hands clasped at her waist. By mutual unspoken concession, they kept a clean 3 feet of gravel between them. The lilac smelt of late May and bruised honey where the wind had bent the lower clusters across the path. A bee, half drugged with the warmth, went past Honoria's shoulder and folded itself into a curl of blossom. She watched it for a moment before she answered. "There is the announcement," he said. "There is?" "There is Augusta." The name passed between them like a coin handed from one palm to another, the metal still warm from his. "There is." "There is my mother, who will want a settlement read at her own table on Tuesday." "She shall have one." He turned a pebble under the toe of his boot. The gravel made a small, soft sound, the kind that domestic ears at 30 paces would not catch, and a thrush in an elder would. "There is the tenantry at Westmere, who will think me out of my mind." "They will think you out of your mind for a season. By Michaelmas they will think you have done the only sensible thing of your dukedom." He stopped under the lilac. He turned to her. "Honoria, may I?" "You may." He put his gloved hand against her cheek. Only the gloved hand. Only the cheek. His thumb passed once across the high bone where her hair was beginning to come loose at the temple from the morning's combing. "You said," he said, "that you had not, before today, been asked." "I had not." "I have been asking in my head since February." "I have been refusing in my head since February." "And in your heart." "Refusing more carefully." He laughed. He bent. He kissed her, briefly, on the bone above her cheek, not on the mouth, because the lilac was over them and the thrush was singing, and Mrs. Cleverley had 11 minutes on a small enamel watch on a chain in the morning room. The thrush stopped briefly and began again. He stepped back. "Honoria." "Theodore." "I have one more thing to ask." "Ask." "Will you—" He glanced at the gravel, then up. "Will you keep the firm?" "I shall keep the firm." "Will you let me, on occasion, bring you a tenant's account to read?" "I shall let you, on occasion." "Will you, when the dowager calls you a duchess, also let her call you Honoria?" "That, sir, will be for the dowager to discover." He smiled. The thrush sang. Mrs. Cleverley, 11 minutes to the second on a small enamel watch, came out with a tea tray and said, "Inside, both of you, the neighbours." The story, of course, kept its own slow shape after that, soft and quiet, like the cold rain on a warm slate roof, the wind low at dusk, the fire small in the grate. There was a paragraph in another printed sheet on the following Monday, in slightly less malicious tone, suggesting that the Duke of Westmere had been not bought, but very thoroughly seen through. which was, in its own way, a worse offence in the eyes of the town than the original charge. There was a small, unannounced visit from Lady Sefton to Mrs. Cleverley's, on the Dowager's quiet behalf, in which a quantity of social ground was secured. There was a longer visit from Caroline Hartley, the Duke's cousin, who set her wine-glass down a quarter-inch on the morning-room table and said, "I should be very happy to be useful to you, Honoria," and meant, this time, a different thing by it, and was believed. There was, on the Tuesday afterwards, an article in the same printed sheet announcing the engagement under the proper names, Miss Honoria Ashcroft, late of Marbury, and listing in the same column the engagements of the Honourable Mrs. Vyse to a Yorkshire baronet she had known since girlhood, of Miss Charlotte Lambeth to a younger son of the Earl of Selden, whom she had known longer, and of Lady Frances Stamford to a widowed Member of Parliament who had courted her for 2 years without daring to ask. Mrs. Cleverley read the 4 engagements aloud over tea, and observed only, "You have rather come into your season at last, Hattie." And Honoria, who had walked the 3 notes herself in the dusk, was very glad she had. There was, on the Wednesday, a sealed packet delivered to Mrs. Cleverley's by a footman, who refused to give the name of his employer. Honoria opened it at the writing desk in the green parlour. Inside lay 2 things. The first was a small, folded paper in a hand she had not seen for 11 years. The second was a printed cutting. The original paragraph, the one Augusta had set down in the printed sheet on the Tuesday before, with a single word inked across it in the same hand. Withdrawn. She unfolded the paper. It was a single page. The paper was heavy and cream, dry beneath the cold hand, the kind a countess used for letters of consequence. The hand was Augusta's, less even than the writing of their 16th summer, but recognizable still. The loop of the H she had taught Honoria in 1815 on a sketching pad at the Crescent. The page began without salutation. "I do not know how to write to you. I have not, in 11 years, known how. I have therefore not. I wronged you on the lawn at Bath. I wronged you on Friday in your own parlour. I wrote the paragraph in the printed sheet that Tuesday in a temper I had no right to. I have withdrawn it this morning at my own expense. Having said to the editor that the paragraph was a lie I composed in pique, and that any future paragraph touching Miss Ashcroft's name in his sheet shall meet, from my husband's solicitor, exactly the response such paragraphs deserve. He has agreed. I should like, if I am permitted, to call upon you when I am in town next Friday. I do not, I think, deserve to be received. I am asking, nevertheless." Maria knows the substance of this letter. She has insisted I sign it without softening it. She is, I find, a better daughter than I have been a friend. Honoria looked up. Mrs. Cleverley, who had come quietly into the parlour with a second cup of tea, set the cup down. "Hattie, Augusta has written, and she is asking to call. Will you receive her?" Honoria folded the page. She did not put it in her pocket. She set it on the writing desk beside the inked cutting. She set her hand flat on the cutting. The word "withdrawn" sat under her palm. She thought of the warm sun on the lawn at Bath, the cold stone of the colonnade bright at her shoulder. She thought of the dry paper of the printer's bill her mother had paid in 1819, the wax of the seal still bright on the fold. She thought of the parish accounts at 11, and her father's voice saying, "Bear ye one another's burdens." She thought of a duke who had written, in his own small, careful slope, that the firm at Half Moon Street should remain in her sole disposition. "I shall receive her," she said. "Friday." Friday. Mrs. Cleverley said nothing for a moment. Then she went round the writing desk and put her hand on Honoria's shoulder once, briefly, and went out. Honoria sat with the page and the cutting in front of her, and did not weep. The hand under her own was the hand of a girl of 15, who had taught her the H she still wrote. The cutting under her palm was the apology of a woman of 32, who had, late and at cost, learned the difference between knowing someone and knowing the shape of an absence. A footman in the hall coughed deliberately. Theodore was at the door. She rose. She crossed to him. She put the page and the cutting on the writing desk where he could see, and she let the paper, this once, speak first. He read. He looked up. She wrote. She wrote. You are receiving her. I am. Friday. Friday. He took her hand. The glove was off. She had taken it off to write. He held the hand a moment, palm to palm, then folded her fingers over his thumb and held them there. Will I be here, he said, or shall I be elsewhere? You shall be in the library across the hall, where Mrs. Cleverley keeps the parish accounts, with the door propped open. Reading. Reading. Not listening. Not listening, he said, the precise volume of voice she judges to be improper. Honoria smiled. Theodore? Yes. Thank you for not telling me what to do. I have learned, Miss Ashcroft, that telling you what to do is the surest way to be wrong. Augusta came on Friday at 3. She came without Maria. The morning was cold and bright, and the brass knocker of the small house in Half Moon Street was warm where the sun had touched it for an hour. She came with a single small basket of strawberries from her own garden in Wiltshire, out of season, raised under glass at considerable expense, the kind of small, absurd offering a vain woman makes when she is genuinely sorry and cannot, in her vanity, say so without an emblem to do the same for her. She gave them to Honoria's maid in the hall, and was shown up to the green parlour without ceremony. Honoria received her standing. Miss Ashcroft. Lady Augusta. There was a long pause. The fire ticked. In the library across the hall, the Duke turned a page of a steward's account book, at exactly the volume a man turns a page when he is reading and not listening. I have come to ask, said Augusta, to be permitted to apologize. In your own room, to your face. Sit, Lady Augusta. Augusta sat. She did not lay her gloves precisely parallel on her lap. She set them down anywhere. It was the gesture of a woman who'd passed beyond the point at which she could maintain the small economies of poise. Honoria, Miss Ashcroft, please, for this afternoon. Augusta inclined her head. The light from the tall window fell warm across the silver at her ear and the cold, polished stone of the mantelpiece. Miss Ashcroft, I wronged you on Friday, in this room. I wronged you the Tuesday after, in the printed sheet. I wronged you, more importantly, on the lawn at Bath on the 18th of August in 1819, 2 days before your father was buried, and I have not, in 11 years, been brave enough to write you. I have written you now. I have also withdrawn the paragraph. The cutting is in your hand. I have read it. I do not ask, said Augusta, to be forgiven this afternoon. I ask only... She stopped. She breathed. I ask only to be told whether I may write you again, in 6 months, and ask. Not now. I have not, this afternoon, earned now. Honoria looked at her hands. She thought of saying, very gently and very precisely, the thing she had practiced in the green parlour mirror the previous evening. A small, dignified absolution that would have closed the matter, kept Augusta at the proper distance, and left the door ajar but no further. She did not say it. She said instead, Augusta. Augusta lifted her face. In 1815, in the Crescent at Bath, you taught me the H I have written ever since. You drew it for me 3 times on a sheet of sketching paper, because I had been told by my governess that my H was a vicar's H, and you said vicar's H's would not, in your view, see one a clear way through life. You were 15. I was 16. I have written every H since that summer in your hand. I did not know I had been doing so until this morning, when I read your apology, and I recognized the loop of the H before I recognized the words. Honoria. You will write me again, not in 6 months, in a month, when you are ready. And you will bring Maria to tea, and I shall tell her she is a great deal better than her mother was at her age, which she is, and you shall have to bear that quietly. Augusta put her hands over her face. It was the gesture of a woman who had not, in 11 years, allowed any room to see it. Honoria sat with her own hands in her lap and waited. The library across the hall was very quiet, in a particular reading quietness that was not, on the whole, reading. After a little while, Augusta lowered her hands. I will bring Maria. You will bring Maria. And the strawberries are very good. I shall send a dish across to His Grace, who is reading in the library, and who shall be told by Mrs. Cleverley that he is required, after he has eaten 3 of them, to come and shake the hand of the lady who sent them. Augusta almost smiled. He is a good man, Honoria. He is. He was not, 3 months ago, certain of it. He is now. The wedding was in October, the cold stone of the church warm in the bright morning sun, the rough wood of the pews soft beneath the hand. It was not at St. George's in the end. Honoria had asked, very quietly, in August, whether the parish church at Marbury would do. The dowager, who was a woman who picked her battles, had said, It will do for me, child. It will do for any London who is brought to see sense by being given a long carriage ride. The parish church at Marbury was small and grey and had been her father's. The bells were rung that morning by 4 men in waistcoats too tight for them. The Reverend Mr. Coombs, the curate who had taken her father's living, read the service in a voice that broke pleasingly at the words, I, Honoria, take thee, Theodore. She wore an indigo silk gown, the silk soft and cold against her warm skin. Not white, which was an affectation of recent years she had no time for, and not grey, which was a confession of widowhood she had no occasion for. A deep indigo, almost violet, which her mother had said in the morning made her look like the sky over the parsonage on the eve of a thaw. Mrs. Cleverley walked behind her up the aisle in steel-coloured silk and a small ruby brooch she had brought out of a drawer for the first time in 30 years. The Dowager Duchess of Westmere sat in the second pew on the bridegroom's side and looked, for the first time in any London memory, ordinary. She had a small handkerchief in her hand and used it twice, and afterwards, in the carriage going back to the wedding breakfast at Westmere, said, If anyone asks, I shall say I had a cold. The breakfast was at the home farm. Theodore had said, in September, I should rather like it at the home farm, if you would not mind it. The barn has been swept, the horses have been turned out. The cottages, whose rents we reduced last Michaelmas, would not, I think, refuse to bring a loaf each. Honoria had said, Theodore, it is your wedding. He had said, It is ours. I shall do as you say. She had said, Then the home farm. There were 80 people. The stone of the old church was cold, even in October. The iron of the gate creaked. A soft wind moved across the wet grass of the yard. There were the 3 tenants whose rents had been reduced, and their wives and 20 children among them. There was Mrs. Cleverley. There was the Dowager. There was Caroline Hartley, in a quiet rose-coloured gown, who at one point in the long afternoon set her wine-glass down a 1/4 inch and said to Honoria, I am very glad it was you, and meant it. There was Augusta Penwarden, who had come up from Wiltshire with Maria, and who at the head of the home farm trestle table caught Honoria's eye, across 2 roast geese, and inclined her head once, a small, unmistakable salute. Maria sat next to a tenant's son of 19, who had inherited his father's farm 2 summers ago, and who, by Christmas, would be writing his own careful note to Mrs. Cleverley's on his own initiative. There was the parish schoolmistress, who had taught Honoria her letters in 1812, and who said, eating a slice of game pie at the corner of the trestle, Hattie, You have come back at the right time. There was Mr. Coombs, his cold hand bright with the brass of his pocket watch, who had broken at I, Honoria, take thee Theodore, and who recovered in the wedding breakfast by drinking a careful glass of small beer and reading them a blessing from a book of Donne which he had, he confessed, at the door at the end of the day, borrowed for the purpose from the Duke's library at Westmere a fortnight before. There was, near the end of the afternoon, a moment Honoria would carry with her for the rest of her life. She had stepped out of the barn for air. The sky was the deep blue of an October that had been kind to itself. The home farm's cherry trees were still half-leaved, the grass under them yellow and warm. Theodore had followed her out. He stood a yard behind her, not crowding. Honoria. Theodore. Look. She looked. He was pointing with his gloved hand, the left, the one with the scar at the wrist, which she had been touching that morning while she did up his neckcloth, and which she had let her touch without flinching, at the small stone bench at the edge of the home farm orchard, where 3 children were sitting in a row eating each a slice of wedding cake. One was the son of the tenant, whose rent had been reduced. One was the daughter of the home farm wheelwright. One was a small grandchild of the dowagers by Theodore's sister-in-law, the one in the confinement, who had been brought down from Hertfordshire for the occasion. The 3 children were not, as far as Honoria could tell, looking at each other. The warm sun was bright on the rough wood of the orchard gate. The cold dew was still on the soft grass at their feet. They were looking in 3 different directions, at 3 different things. The son of the tenant was watching a sparrow on a fence rail. The wheelwright's daughter was watching the corner of her own piece of cake. The small grandchild was watching, with great concentration, his own bare feet. They are not, Theodore said, speaking. They are not. They are perfectly content. They are. He came and stood beside her. He put his gloved hand on the small of her back, very lightly, where no one could see. This, he said, is what I wanted. 3 children eating cake. This. A house where one does not have to perform. A wife with whom one does not have to perform. An afternoon where a duke can stand in a barn at his own wedding and watch 3 children eat cake and feel, for the first time in 19 years, that he is not on parade. Honoria turned. The October sun was on the side of his face. The scar on his wrist showed below the cuff where he had pushed the sleeve back to handle a glass of cider. A small wind came up the home farm lane and lifted a curl of her hair against the bone above her ear. She did not put it back. Somewhere behind the barn, a child was singing a chase song in 3 repeating notes, the kind of inexact tune that children sing to themselves when nobody is listening for it. The October light lay long and yellow on the cherry trees, and warm on her right hand, where it rested against the side of her gown. Theodore? Yes? Bear ye one another's burdens. That, Miss Ashcroft, is the text my mother heard your father preach in 1812. It is also, she said, the text I have been trying for 3 months to ask you to share. He looked at her for a moment. I shall, he said, from now. A year later, in the spring, the dowager wrote a long letter to her sister-in-law at Bath. The sister-in-law had asked, in some asperity, whether London had ever, in the end, forgiven the Duke of Westmere for his very irregular marriage. The dowager wrote in reply, You ask whether they have forgiven him. I should say rather that they have forgotten there was anything to forgive. The Duchess has been received everywhere this season. Lady Sefton's, Mrs. Burrell's, the new Lady Holland's, without comment. And the comment that there was last year has, by some quiet, collective decision of the women who matter, been put down to a fit of pique on Augusta Penwarden's part, for which Augusta has, in any case, paid quite handsomely. The Duchess does not, you should know, dance. She does not, you should also know, need to. She stands very still by the long window of any drawing-room, and within 20 minutes, someone has come to her with a daughter, or a niece, or a young cousin, and has stayed in confidence for half an hour. Mrs. Cleverley's firm has, this season, increased its business by 11 engagements over last. The Duchess is not a partner. She is, in some informal sense she has refused to clarify, the firm's advisor. I do not pretend to understand it. I've stopped trying. Theodore, and on this you may quote me, has not, in 9 months of being married to her, woken up shouting once. He has not woken up shouting since June. I have not, in 10 years, written that sentence about my son. You may quote me on that. I will not write it twice. The home farming May. The lilac was out along the wall of the orchard. A thrush was singing in the elder. 2 of the 3 children from the wedding breakfast were running, very seriously, after a hen that had escaped from the run. A third, older now by a year, taller, was sitting on the small stone bench, eating a slice of bread and watching them. Honoria sat on a folded rug under the cherry tree with a book in her lap that she had not read for 10 minutes. Theodore lay on the grass beside her, his hat tilted over his eyes, his left wrist bare to the sun. The scar was almost gone, silvered, no longer red. She had not, in 3 months, seen him reach for his old folded letter once. He had told her last week, in passing, that he had put it in a drawer of his writing table at Westmere, and she had said, "Drawer or fire?" And he had said, "Drawer, for now." And she had said, "Drawer is enough." A small ant climbed across the bare wrist. He let it travel the length of the silvered scar without brushing it off. He watched it. A bee made its slow business along the line of clover at the rug's edge. Somewhere beyond the orchard wall, the parish bell at Marbury struck the half-hour in 2 soft strokes, and a hen, scolded back into the run, took up the matter with herself in a low, complaining note that carried across the grass like an old aunt's grievance. Honoria. Theodore. There is a paragraph in this morning's sheet. There always is. It says I have been seen through. You have. It implies you have been the one to do the seeing. I have. He tipped the hat back. He looked up at her. Do you mind? That I've seen you through? No. That London has noticed? Not in the smallest part. Mrs. Cleverley? Mrs. Cleverley is laughing into her tea. She has cut the paragraph and pasted it into her engagement book. You write very well, Miss Ashcroft. I wrote it, sir, with great care. The Honourable Mrs. Vyse referred 2 daughters of her Yorkshire friends to me last Tuesday on the strength of it. The thrush stopped briefly and began again. The hen, recaptured, was being carried back to the run by the wheelwright's daughter, who had grown an inch since October. Theodore put his hand, palm up, on the rug between them. Honoria put hers on his. You hired me, she said, to find you a wife. I did. I brought you 5. You did. You rejected them and took my hand. I did. I do. I shall. He sat up. He kissed her, briefly, on the mouth, because the orchard was empty in their direction, and the children were busy with the hen, and Mrs. Cleverley was at Half Moon Street, and the Dowager was at Westmere, writing to her sister-in-law. He sat back. He set his hand on her knee, lightly, through the fold of her muslin gown. Theodore? Yes. It is very nearly tea. It is. You should go and warn the dairyman that we shall want a pail of cream. He is afraid of you. He is not afraid of me. He calls you sir, not your grace. He is afraid of you. He needs to be told the cream is wanted by his duchess and not his duke. Tell him yourself. I have. He has not believed me. Theodore got up, slowly, his cold hand on the rough bark of the apple tree, the way he had risen from one knee in the green parlour. He brushed the soft-cut grass from the dark wool of his coat. He bent and kissed the top of her head, on the parting where her hair was still, after a year of marriage, sometimes coming a little loose at the temple from the morning's combing. I shall warn the dairyman, he said. "Tell him also," she said, "that I shall require, this afternoon, a quiet half-hour with the home farm accounts. He will faint. Let him faint. I shall mend him with the cream." He laughed. He walked away across the grass. The sun was on his shoulders. The scar at his wrist caught the light once and was gone under the cuff, and was, by Honoria's exact private record, the last time she would notice it as a scar rather than a feature of the wrist of her husband. She watched him go. She picked up the book again. The thrush in the elder began its evening song. Far away, beyond the home farm wall, the small parish bell at Marbury began to ring the hour, and the sound came across the May orchard in 3 soft passes. She sat very still under the cherry tree, with her hand flat on the open page, and she thought, in the way one thinks at the end of a quiet day, about the small printed letter at the top of her marriage register entry, the bright H in her name, the H Augusta had drawn for her at the Crescent in 1815 with a sharp quill on cream paper, and that she had written ever since in her own warm hand on every contract for Mrs. Cleverley's firm, and on every brief to the Duke of Westmere in February and March and April, was the same H her husband had written that morning at the head of the household accounts, in his small, careful slab, in the column reserved for the Duchess of Westmere's notes. The thrush sang on. "Honoria!" called Theodore from the orchard gate. "Theodore! The dairyman has fainted." "Then bring me the cream yourself," she called back, "and we shall see what a duke is good for." The orchard gate clicked behind him. She set the book down and went, smiling, to meet him on the path.